Hello, everyone. My name is Amber Didden. I am the Vice President of Strategic Initiatives.
My name is Pastor Bradley Stahl. I'm the lead campus pastor.
And today we're putting together a training, more like a conversation about building your marriage. We wanted to put this together for our families as a resource and really wanted to focus on three perspectives. So the first one would be building your marriage as a patient or a student in one of our programs. The second one would be as the spouse of someone in recovery, so not necessarily in a program, but just in the recovery process. And then the third perspective is how do you build your marriage if you are the parents of someone in recovery? So how do you and your spouse continue to work on your marriage while your son or daughter or loved one is in the recovery process? We get asked questions all the time about all three of those categories, but particularly the third one. So I'm excited to talk about some of that today. So I just asked Pastor Bradley to come in and have this conversation with me.
Yes.
So Pastor Bradley, would you tell everyone a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your story?
Well, I am 43 years old. I have a wonderful wife of 20 years. I have two beautiful children, Bradley Jr., 18, and Jaden Marie, 15 years old. I, too, have a lifelong history of drug abuse, where I went through California Teen Challenge in 2009. And my marriage was really broken at that time. And through going through the program and different things that transpired, God has restored it. And I love to share about it. And I thank you for having me here today.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for sharing. Just a little bit about myself. My husband and I are celebrating our 10-year wedding anniversary on Thursday. So we met in Bible school, got married, and then 3 years after we got married, my husband suffered a relapse, and I didn't know anything about addiction, was very naive to the whole thing, but luckily we were surrounded by people at Teen Challenge. He went through the restoration program in Western PA, and yeah, God just really took good care of us and taught us what we needed to know. So we're now 5 years in recovery and 10 years married, and so yeah, it's just really good to see what God has done.
Amen.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. He's a good God.
Yeah, absolutely. And so much hope. There's so much hope through Christ and through the recovery process, and it's just good to know that it's not over, you know?
Yes.
Yeah. So there are a few kind of pillars that I wanted to talk about in the training this month. Kind of like what comprises a healthy marriage, or what are some components of a healthy marriage. And the first one is commitment. The second one is trust. The third one is forgiveness. The fourth one is honesty and acceptance. And then the fifth one is communication. So I just have a few questions that I thought I could ask you and we can kind of talk about. And we'll go through each of those things, and hopefully we share some wisdom with each other.
We will.
Okay. So the first one, commitment. What would you say that unconditional love looks like in a marriage?
Conditional love in a marriage is accepting the person for who they are.
Mm-hmm.
For me, my wife is very loving. She's very compassionate, and for a long time I didn't know how to love.
Mm-hmm.
So when she loved me, it was uncomfortable,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore I pulled away. But through my learning of how it is to be a godly man, I've learned to accept and understand her embracing me in love.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I think one of the light bulb moments for me was realizing that I can love my spouse and not love the addiction.
Yes.
And that my spouse is not his addiction. And those things can be separate. And I can absolutely love him and all the fun things about him and just despise all the addictive behaviors. And those things can go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And also the idea that you can support your spouse's recovery without being responsible for their recovery.
But we both were in addiction at the same time, so the love was so dysfunctional.
Mm-hmm.
And when it's dysfunctional, you don't have reality of what really love is until you get, your sobriety and you start to move in Christ. Then you see what love is, and you're like, oh, this was so broken all the time, and you don't know it.
Right.
So when you have your wife or your husband that are in addiction, and you're in addiction, there's no healthy boundaries, so you don't even know what love is because you don't even love yourself.
Right.
So yeah, I completely understand.
Yep. That kind of leads into my next question, which is, how would you explain the difference between codependency and interdependency? If you don't know, I have the answer.
Give it to me.
Okay. So codependency is defined as an excessive reliance on your spouse to meet your emotional needs to the point that you take responsibility for controlling their behavior. So I need my husband to be happy, to be engaged, to be present, and if he's not, my life is just ruined. And so I'm going to do everything I can. I'm going to skip work. I'm going to, do whatever he's asking me to do so that he's happy, so that I'm happy. That's codependency. That's relying on his emotion or her emotion to fulfill what I need. Now, interdependence is being able to express a healthy need in your relationship and receive a response from your spouse. So it's not about control over emotions. It's about feeling comfortable to share an emotion and then have them kind of share that back with you.
Regardless what the answer is back.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. Amen.
Yeah.
Yes.
I see a lot of families struggling with the boundary of codependency and enabling and support. So from the perspective of a student in the program, what would you say to other students in the program whose spouse is on the other side and they're kind of wrestling with how much is too much to ask of my spouse? How much is too much to require of them? At what point does enabling cross the boundary of support, if that makes sense?
Well, I think to each student, the level of damage that they've caused gives them kind of what they should reach out for and what they shouldn't. I reached out very little because my wife was in her addiction when I was there. And it was the best thing for me because I didn't want to put her first before anything. In my recovery, I needed to put God first, and then God could work on me. So, but I think, we as men and in addiction, we expect our wives to say yes because we've made the mark to go to treatment. So you should be proud of us, and so then for whatever I need, you should help me with. Which is no, that's wrong because actually, the no in every question that they ask is strengthening them to be able to make decisions on their own, healthy decisions. So I tell the guys, the less you ask of your spouse while you're here, other than prayer or, talking to the kids if you have kids, is better because it's showing them that you're working on yourself. And in a relationship, if you don't know how to treat yourself, you definitely don't know how to treat your spouse. So I think reaching out is good, but asking too much, and then it puts an obligation on the parent or the wife that's out there trying to make it, stresses her out, and it's unfair. It's all about taking care of yourself when you're in Teen Challenge. It shows you a structure to be a man so that you can be the head of the household and that you can support her, your wife. So I asked for very little because she wasn't going to give it to me anyway. So, but I didn't want to put a burden on anybody because I've already done that so many times. So it was my time to step up and say, all right, if I don't have it, I don't need it.
Yeah.
You see a lot of times shoes come in for the guys and then they come accustomed, they're not learning anything because they're being given everything they're asking for, and that's not what we need. We need to be able to be okay with not having the things that the world says is good.
Right.
So, yeah.
I remember it was very freeing for me when I realized I didn't have to say yes to those kinds of requests.
Exactly.
And just kind of going back to the idea of loving your spouse and not necessarily loving the behaviors.
Right.
I knew when he was in the program, in the restoration program, he had food, he had shelter, he had what he needed, and there was nothing else that he needed to survive. He was going to be okay.
Absolutely.
And it really taught me to look at him for who he was as a person and love that person in the situation that he was in, and not try to tack on these other things that were going to try to, make him happy so that I felt happy, you know. So it was a crash course in codependence and learning how to kind of break that. So I think it's important for spouses and parents, because parents deal with this exact same situation all the time, to know that they can still love their loved one and say no to the shoes, or say no
Yeah.
to the mountain money, or say
Absolutely,
no,
yeah.
And that doesn't mean that you don't love them. That doesn't mean that you don't support them. They have everything they need to survive while they're here. You are just there to get to know them, to share in their emotions, that interdependence,
Right, absolutely.
and grow in that during this time. And it actually becomes a really safe, awesome place for that
normal.
to happen.
It's healthy, and that's normal.
Right.
Everything in our thinking is not normal,
Right.
and everything is an emergency.
Right.
And manipulation plays a huge part in that. Oh, I don't have this, they have that. I need you to send me this. Now you're putting more stress
Right.
on the wife that's already stressed.
Right.
So yeah, I find it we get selfish in treatment where we think that we're owed it because, like I said, we're there, and it's really opposite. So for the wife to be able to say no is creating a great boundary of,
Right.
no, if you need something, like you really need it, then okay. But shoes and all that, you're good.
Right.
And so I think it's a healthy way to be able to say no.
Right. And it puts the emphasis on the person, on your relationship, and off of all the stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So the next pillar in a healthy marriage is trust. And sometimes when you're in the midst of this process, or at the very beginning of the process, it's hard to know how or whether or not trust will ever be restored.
Absolutely.
So what are your thoughts on that? How is trust restored?
Trust. Trust for me, I didn't trust my wife, and my wife definitely didn't trust me because there was reason why not to trust. I think the biggest thing with that is that me trusting her wasn't at my convenience. It was when she felt, or I felt like, okay, she's being real, and she's being, and it's hard. It's a hard thing to try to balance out, because in the back of your mind, you're always thinking of the past and what happened, and is this a point where I knew she was lying or I was lying, and half the time I was lying. So it was really hard. And I think now with my relationship with my wife is I'm 100% open with her. So it makes me be able to be trusted and trustworthy because of the fact that I'm not scared to tell her any of my shortcomings. And a lot of times we're dishonest because we're afraid to be honest with our spouse that we're struggling in different areas. And I'm sure that you can attest to that too. But trust is huge. And if you don't have trust, it probably is not going to work.
Right. I think one thing that I hear oftentimes is, or I sense from people when I'm talking to them, is this feeling that as soon as my loved one comes home from treatment, trust should be restored. Like we need to work on this while they're in treatment. When they come home, there's going to be trust, and if there's a breach of trust, that's it, or if there's a breach of trust, what the heck am I going to do, you know, like
right.
And so there's a fear that bubbles up from that, and I think knowing that you have all the time in the world to reestablish that trust, or just telling yourself that, we've got plenty of time, and we'll deal with the trust issues as they come, but we don't have to force ourselves to deal with them.
I mean, I think it's healthy to have a plan and a communication factor, but to put a blueprint on, okay, if you don't do this, this is what's going to happen, because then you're setting yourself up for failure, because then you're looking for them to break trust. Right. And it just leads to an unhealthy personal life and a marriage, So I think you're exactly right with that. Like, you have to just know that your spouse is trying, and yes, they're gonna fall short, and yes, we're gonna let each other down. But the fact of the matter is if you're trying, there's gonna be, your actions will line up with that. And I think it's healthy, like you said, that we have to not put expectations on when's he gonna let me down, or when's he gonna not be truthful.
Right. So. Right. Or when is the day coming that I'm finally going to trust? Like, it's not today, so when's it going to be, That can cause you to despair, because you're just like, okay, it's been 6 months. How come I still don't trust him? Or how come he still doesn't trust me? And so there's plenty of time. There are a couple items that I had here in my notes. That trust can be restored when you're both committed to the process. So we talked about commitment. And I think this comes in, especially when you are the parents of someone in recovery, being committed in that process together will build trust between the two of you. And being committed to your spouse's recovery and saying, like, I'm supporting your recovery, I'm not in charge of it, but I'm in full support.
Right.
That will help kind of bring trust to the surface.
It does.
The other one was when you both own what's yours to improve. So, through step work, we talk about taking a daily inventory. And one thing that was helpful for me was I joined Celebrate Recovery.
Yes.
And even though I've never struggled with substance abuse, walking through those steps was so healthy for me just to understand some of the stuff going on in my own mind and my own heart. And taking that inventory of yourself is so helpful. And it'll demonstrate to your spouse that you are working too, and that they're not alone in that process.
Absolutely. Actually, there's 4 or 5 staff members at Teen Challenge right now that we're doing it together. Celebrate Recovery.
That's great.
It is.
Yeah, it's a great program.
It is.
Yeah. The other one is when you communicate clearly, obviously. So we're going to talk about that in a minute. And then the last one is kind of what we were talking about, which is investing in the time it takes to see good, consistent behaviors over time.
Right.
Because you're not going to see those habits die hard. And even if they've been in a program for a year or more, they're going to come home and they're going to kind of get back into some of those old habits. Right. Or some of them just haven't changed yet, and you have to be willing to say, we're going to give this the time it needs, and then every time we see a positive behavior, we're going to put that one in the bank. We're just going to look for positive.
It is very scary. When I graduated Teen Challenge, I was very, very scared. Not so much to do drugs, but to let people down again. It was very hard for me to say, okay, it's okay if I make mistakes. But I was scary. Yeah. It was scary. So, we have to understand that when the guys leave Teen Challenge, if they decide to go back home or wherever they go, that it's a process. And we have to be patient with that. Because they are coming out of so-called like a bubble, and they're going back into society where we haven't been in quite a while. And so it's very, very important that we support them and hear them through that process also. Absolutely.
And as a spouse or as a parent, the more you can demonstrate your commitment to that person, and say, I don't care, if you mess up, drugs or otherwise, I still love you. Absolutely. I still love you. Absolutely.
That's great.
Yeah, and for someone who is in recovery to hear that, it really does start to help, like you said, start to help you build that trust and feel secure, and then you stop thinking about the relapse or the poor behavior, and you start thinking about all the positive things that you have in your relationships in your life, and your mental capacity is going towards the stuff that's beneficial and not towards the fear and the negativity. Yeah, that's really good. The next one I have on here is forgiveness. And again, that's another thing, just like trust, that a lot of times we think forgiveness is a thing where someone says, I'm so sorry, and you say, it's okay, or I forgive you, and then forgiven, right? And then we don't think about it, we don't talk about it, everything's forgiven. No, it's okay, it's forgiven. And that is not the way that it works.
It does not. That's a TV show reality.
Absolutely.
It's not reality.
Yeah, and I know from my experience that was one thing I was like, okay, you're forgiven, I forgive you. And then I would wake up every day and be like, but do I?
Yeah.
Really?
And it messes you up more than anything.
Right.
Yeah.
And so recognizing that forgiveness is definitely a process. But the other thing that I've heard from people is this idea of like not knowing if you've forgiven someone. How do I know that I forgive them? Right. So what would you say to that?
Well, I have a huge motto on forgiveness. Like our forgiveness isn't at the people that we've hurt. So my brother and I had a really great relationship, but through my addiction, it became very toxic because I did it. And it's 10 years later, and it's still not to a point. And so, for me, forgiveness is it's shown by the actions that you like. For what I do with my wife is that my word lines up with my actions, and through that time of doing that and longevity of doing that, the forgiveness has been there because she knows I've changed. But it was a process. It's not an overnight, okay, you're done, I'm forgiven. Because realistically, if you've done as many bad things as I've done, it's going to take a while to earn that back. And I hate to say this, but 10 years later, my brother and he still is reluctant to trust me. And it's like, what do I have to do? But it's not at my time. I caused it, so I have to be willing to be patient with it. So
yeah, absolutely.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, you did. I'm just kind of thinking about.
I don't think I answered it.
No, you didn't. That's okay.
I did not, so we might have to take it over, do it again.
I think, I think there's just that idea that forgiveness is a word you say or just something that's done, and then you can kind of close the chapter and move on to the next thing. When in reality, forgiveness is something that happens so subtly and slowly over time that one day you just kind of wake up and you're like, okay.
You feel better.
Yeah. And it takes a lot of work, and I think some people definitely have a moment where it's just like gone, and but for a lot of people it's just, a little bit here and there. Time goes by, and I know what I was going to say. I was going to say that it's absolutely 100% okay if you don't forgive your spouse when they come home.
Yes.
That is okay.
It's okay.
And there's nothing wrong with you.
They should not.
There's nothing
really
unhealthy about your relationship. It's just human hearts take time to heal, and forgiveness needs investment. And a lot of people get hung up on that. Like, well, I don't forgive him yet, or she doesn't forgive me yet, and I don't know how we're gonna get through this. That's okay. Go outside, have fun together. Yeah. Do something, that's gonna build your relationship. And don't talk about forgiveness right now. Just enjoy each other's company. The forgiveness will come.
I think my wife and I, when we talk, it was like a main priority to always focus on, am I gonna forgive this? Am I trusting him today? And when she stopped doing that, is when actually the healing process came, where she could be able to do those things. So putting it not on your agenda to think about it that day is actually where you get released from being able to be worried about that.
Absolutely. Good stuff. We talked about this, we touched on it a little bit earlier, but is it possible to love your spouse and hate their addictive behaviors at the same time?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. And also we kind of covered this too, but when do you need to forgive your spouse? At what point it's like, okay, you should have forgiven them by now?
Yeah, most of the time something's going on inside of you if you don't want to forgive them after a long period of time. That's a difficult question. I don't know. I just kind of knew that God had touched her life and she was changed, so why shouldn't I be able to do that? So I guess that's how I did it.
Yeah, I don't think there's any limit. I think it can take you as long as it needs to take you.
Yeah.
But as long as you don't let that be the main focus. It's okay to accept the fact that the forgiveness isn't there yet. That's okay. We're just going to keep living our life, and we're going to try to build as much relationship as we can, and the forgiveness will come when it's time for it to
I think when
arrive.
you look for fault, you find it. But, 9 times out of 10, I tell the guys to look for the positive things. Because we're good at looking at negative to put us in that perspective. I don't trust him. I'm never going to forgive him. Look what he does.
Right.
But we have to put our mind state in, okay, look what he's doing positive. And then that can kind of change your perspective, I think.
And then from the perspective of spouses that are parents, learning to forgive one another in that process is really critical.
It is.
Because a lot of times all your energy and focus is going onto the one who's in recovery or who's in treatment or in addiction, and you and your spouse are hurting each other.
Yeah.
And you're not really realizing it until all the little fissures, all the little wounds just start to break apart. Yeah. And so it's very important that we are taking those inventories inside of ourselves, apologizing for the things that we are uncovering first.
Right.
And then, exchanging forgiveness between one another, I think, is so important to remember.
It is.
Yeah. Oh, there was one other good thing on here. I came across this little phrase, and it says, your relationship trumps the recovery. So your relationship with your spouse, whatever's going on between you, is more important than whether or not your loved one is using substances. Because back to the idea that you love your loved one and you don't love the addiction, and those things can be separate.
Yes.
So my relationship with you, whether you're using or not, is
I
important.
Love you. Yeah.
Right. I love you. I'm not going anywhere. That's not going to change. The addiction stuff we'll deal with, but this isn't changing. So your relationship is so much more important than whether or not your loved one's going to recovery meetings, than whether or not they're
absolutely.
Even completing the program, which of course we want people to complete.
Yeah.
But that's not the main thing. We've got to keep the main thing the main thing.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Honesty and acceptance is kind of our next pillar. So how would you say that acceptance, trust, and honesty are interrelated? How would you describe that relationship?
Well, they go hand in hand. For me, honesty, first to myself. I think a lot of times we focus on being, okay, I'm going to be very honest to my wife, but we're not honest to ourselves. So it twists us up. I see that all the time. And for me, if I'm doing the right things and I'm being honest with myself, then I can obviously be honest with my spouse. We have a great relationship. We trust. Like, it's actually a really good feeling to be able to trust and be honest with your wife and to have acceptance from your wife, because for so long we wanted it, but we were so damaged that we didn't know how to go about it. And I love her just for who she is. So I think what you say with the addict, we don't love the addictive person, but we love the person that we married. And when you lose the addiction, you find that all the love, the trust, the honesty, the acceptance has always been there. It's just the other person that they bring into the relationship that you. So for me, it did happen, and it's still happening. There's things that we still talk about that we say, man, you really broke my heart there, and I didn't want to trust you, but I'm so glad I trust you today, because it's healthy, because we're open and honest, and my recovery isn't her recovery, and her recovery isn't mine, and we can't treat it the same because it's not. So, did I answer the question?
Yeah, you did. That's
I
good.
did. This time I'm good. Praise the Lord.
So this circle of acceptance, trust, and honesty, when spouses whose loved one is in recovery make it their mantra that they are going to accept their loved one no matter what, it lays this foundation for this whole cycle. Because when I am accepting as a spouse, my loved one then can trust that I'm not going anywhere, and they can share things with me, and then they can be honest, right? And then that honesty about their temptations or their fears about using or their past hurts or whatever will then generate some more acceptance, because I'm going to be accepting of all that stuff. I'm going to say, I love you with all of your fears and all of your temptations and all of that. I love you anyway. And then that's going to breed more trust. So we go around and around and around the cycle.
That's a great point.
And it really is a beautiful thing when all of those three components come together and they all kind of like spawn off of each other, you know? So the more acceptance we have, the more trust, the more honesty, and around we go.
Let me just say this. There was a time early in recovery where I was mowing the yard, and my wife came out, and I said, man, it's really hot. I would love a cold beer right now. And she freaked out. Everything went revert. Oh my God, he's going to relapse. Oh, this, and this. And I realized what I had said. And it about a month later, she goes, I didn't realize how much that still was a fear of mine, that even if I mentioned it, which I didn't, it just sounded good.
Right.
And we can't be like, we're never going to think of things like that, because that's not being honest.
Right.
And then I'm like, why did I tell her that? Now I'm going to suffer the consequence for this. But she accepted it more because I was honest with her that this is my feeling, like this is what I'm craving, and I don't want to crave it. But she went into panic mode. Right. And that's early. Now if I said it, she'd be like, that doesn't even make sense. Right. What are you talking about? Yeah. But you see the comparison in early restoration with a family and loved ones, and trust and honesty and being able to say that, and the reaction to longevity is different.
Yeah, so. It took me a long time on the other side of that. I totally know what you're talking about, or what she was talking about. It took me a very long time to break. It was a habit. It was absolutely a habit. When I heard something that made me concerned, the consequences came out. It was like, we got to get you back in.
How can I trust him?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, the whole thing, rabbit hole down. And so taking those thoughts captive, like the Bible talks about taking thoughts captive, but we can definitely identify those thoughts and be mindful of those thoughts and say, okay, I'm feeling afraid. And then when you can vocalize that, instead of saying like, what are you talking about? Say, what you just said to me made me feel afraid.
Yes.
You know?
Can we pray, please, Pastor Brad? That's what she tells me.
And then it goes back into that interdependence, because if I can say I'm feeling afraid and my spouse says, how can I help you with that? Right. Then we can work with each other instead of like getting into the crazy cycle.
No, because it's very healthy to be able to be honest. Like, I love being able to tell my wife, oh, I'm struggling today, you know, and instead of hiding it. Yep. And it's so like, it really makes her, she's my best friend. And like, you know, that kind of best friend where you can be just who you are. You know, and not who you used to be. And so that doesn't really play a factor in our marriage anymore about who we used to be. Yeah. because we've really worked on the being honest, having acceptance for one another, and really loving and trusting each other. So it feels really good. It's very healthy.
Yes. Yeah. I think, excuse me, the other piece of that is that in the beginning, it was almost like I had to fake it till I made it. You know, like I didn't want to.
But it's okay.
Calm. I just pretended to be.
It's okay.
And then it's amazing. It didn't take very long before that was an actual genuine response. But in the beginning, it was like, this is not how I want to be.
No, you're looking at him like this.
I want to call all my friends. I want to tell him he's got to sleep somewhere else. I want to just like put the kibosh on it. But then eventually those things became came to me naturally, and it was really neat to see that.
It is. It's good to get a perspective from your end, because it's like, okay, they feel everything we do. Yeah. It's like not different. Right. They feel everything we do, and we feel everything they do. We just don't know how to process it the same.
Right. Yeah. I really like this quote. It said, "To be fully seen by somebody then and be loved anyhow, this is a human offering that can border on miraculous." So, that idea of just being completely exposed to someone, them seeing all your junk, them loving you anyway, not loving the junk, but loving you. Yeah. That can just, like I said, spur that whole cycle on. I really like that.
I tell my wife, you're married to a junkyard, but there's a lot less junk than there was prior, and that's all because of Teen Challenge offered me a place to be able to find what I was missing, and it was love, from the Father. So,
cool. All right, we're already on our last pillar here.
Nice.
And that is communication. The first question I had for you is more from the perspective of spouses who have a loved one in recovery. Okay. So what's the best way for married couples to communicate with their addicted loved ones if they have different approaches to helping them through the recovery process? So let's say, mom is super strict and she, just lays down the law and that's what it is, and dad's a little more forgiving, maybe enabling a little bit, and the two of them can't agree, but they've got to talk to their loved one. How do they figure that out?
Well, my parents, and for me, my parents, because of my addiction, it caused them great turmoil, and it was very, very damaging to the marriage, because my mom was but he's my son, I'm going to give him $60, and my dad's like, well, I'm tired of giving him, this is not just $60, and so what happened is that through time, my dad would watch different things about how to, I think that the recovery process for the parents is important too. They have to learn to say no. They have to learn to communicate and come up with a solution of, okay, well, what are you okay with and what are you not okay with? And then they have to come to a formula where they have to say, okay, we're not going to do this and we're going to do it together. So many times, mom says yes and doesn't tell dad, and then dad finds out that she enabled. So the communication is very important. I tell the parents all the time, if you're going to communicate with them, be positive, but also be honest. If you're not happy with, say, what they're doing, it's okay to be honest. Because so many times, as the addicted person, my mom didn't want to tell me something, it's going to trigger him. So the communication wasn't what it needed to be. It was, if I tell him this, he may use drugs again. So, and then my dad's like, you need to tell him. So the communication, I was the dysfunction to the whole problem, because my mom would hide and my dad would find out, and then the communication, it caused a lot of stress. And so I think we have to understand that communication can be minimal. It's okay at times to not have a lot of conversation. My parents didn't call me a lot when I was in the program, because the communication, my dad and mom were tired of me being the dysfunction in their marriage. So they had to learn to communicate together again, because I destroyed that. So, communication is effective, but it has to be an agreement. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think you mentioned kind of education, and that parents need to understand what's happening. And we, this is one of many great trainings that we offer through family programming.
It's so important.
And the more that parents and families can understand what's going on in the mind of an addicted person as they are healing, that becomes very important and will inform some of the decisions that you make. And the other thing I think you also mentioned at the very end there coming to an agreement before you go talk to your loved one.
Yeah.
So there's this idea of like a family board of directors where you and your spouse or you and your extended family get together and you say, this is how we're going to approach this, you know.
Right.
Johnny needs to go to recovery. We're going to get him there. If he leaves, we're not going to support that.
Right.
You know, we're laying down kind of our boundaries, and that's just what it is. And then once he's in the program, here's how we're going to communicate with him and come to an agreement before the thing happens.
Right.
And so with parents, I recommend that they lock themselves in a room.
Yes.
And they do not leave that room until they come to a consensus. And it might take you a couple of hours, but you've got to lay down rules that you agree on,
it's very important.
or else you're gonna get split apart.
Right.
So it's very important that you have something that you both agree on, that you're going down the same path, and then that way when you talk to your loved one, you guys are on the same page.
There was a incident with me and T. Jones where a guy said, well, I'm just going to ask my parents when they come on Saturday. But it was it was like not just a question. It was like a big decision. I said, that's very unfair. I said, because you're going to put them on the spot where they think that they're going to have to answer. But I'm here to tell you that not every question in a communication with your loved one at family day has to be answered at that time. It's probably better that you go home and you do discuss what it was, because what happens is the addictive person or the person in treatment is looking for an answer right away, and when they don't get it, they don't know what to do, and then now manipulation sets in.
Absolutely.
And so what I say is, when we make decisions at our house for our son or our daughter, it's never on the spot. If it's a big question, it's always, well, we'll talk about it and we'll get back to you. They don't. It's the worst thing ever. It's like you just took their phone. But it's healthy, because then you're communicating with your husband or your spouse and saying, we're going to do this together. So a decision has to be made together. Don't give them an answer right away.
Right.
Make them wait on the answer, because it's not, that question has been brewing in that person's head for a long time. They just now got the courage to answer it. So it could have been addressed a long time ago.
Exactly. Yeah. I think one thing that works really well when your loved one is in a program, although it doesn't work great when they come home, but when they're in the program, writing letters is a great way to communicate.
It's better.
Because you have time to start implementing some of those new communication habits. And when you're talking just person to person, stuff just comes out.
Right,
you know?
right.
But if
It's
you're
important.
writing in a letter, you can always erase it, grab a new piece of paper, throw it in the waste bin, and just keep going. And your loved one can start building those habits on their end as well. So it gives you guys a little bit of a cushion on either way, like a damper, to make sure that we're building healthy habits.
That's so true. And it makes them learn how to communicate, not on paper.
Right.
And I don't like writing letters, but I had to write letters because no one wanted to talk on the phone.
And just like on a personal note, later on, those those letters, if you save them, become
I still
very
got
valuable.
mine.
Yeah, me too. I've got a whole bundle of them.
I was a mess.
Yeah, and it's just, I mean, every once in a while, it takes me some courage to like get the courage up to look through them. But when you do, you just see the growth. You know, you really do.
And that helps your trust too.
Absolutely.
Because you see what has transpired from that date. It's very healthy.
Very cool. My second question is, well, the second piece of this is that we can't be afraid to fight. So a lot of times, people think that a perfect marriage or a perfect relationship means we never argue. You know, like I had a great grandmother and she said, we never argue, you know. No. Oh, okay.
We just didn't talk for 3 days.
Right, exactly. So I think it is very healthy and, dare I say, fun to argue with some ground rules.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I know for my husband and I, we have our own ground rules. They're not written down, but we know what they are.
There's boundaries.
Yeah. Do you mind sharing a few of your fighting ground rules?
Yeah. I never go personal. I never cuss.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm wrong, I admit it.
Yeah.
And that's the worst fight.
Yeah.
Because you have to say, dang it.
Yeah, you're right.
But you know what? It is... We laugh when we fight sometimes because I'll say something and she'll be in there and she doesn't see my face. I'm like, you know, she doesn't see it, so I can do it.
Right.
But then, like, one time I went around the corner and I caught her making that same face, and I'm like, well, she does it too. Then it's accepted. But it is good, okay. It's okay to fight healthy. Now, if you're fighting and it becomes where you go to sleep at night not happy with each other, which is non-biblical, then we have a problem. But 9 times out of 10, a good argument keeps the monotony going in the marriage.
Right.
You know?
Absolutely.
I don't win ever. Be honest, I don't win.
I can probably attest to that. I can see that.
My wife is so much more educated than I am.
I think someone gave us a good piece of marriage advice before we got married 10 years ago.
Yay!
Yay! I'm so excited. We were talking about ground rules for fighting, and she said the number one rule is you never say the D word. You never say divorce. And the reason why is because it goes back to that commitment that we were talking about. We're not even gonna talk about it. It's not on the table.
It's
not a thought. It's not a possibility. No. And in this whole recovery process, we've changed that to the L word, the leave word. I'm not going to leave you. You're not going to leave me. We are not leaving. We're not getting a divorce.
Yeah.
Never. Nope. Not coming up.
We're going to get through this and watch TV.
Yeah. And when you take that out of your vocabulary, again, like early years of marriage, we would get into an argument and it would be like there, and I'd be like, nope, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
And then the habit just goes away. You just don't.
So damaging.
Absolutely.
Like if you think about it, like I tell my wife, it doesn't matter, I'll never leave you. So that in the ends the argument. But you're right, because there's been many times in the dysfunction between my wife and I where I was like, well, just find someone else then. And then what's her response? Well, I sure will. And then all of a sudden you're like, wait, she's leaving me.
Right.
And then here I am. And then now it's just, now the fight is now escalated to something that it didn't need to be.
It
so
plants
it's great
seeds,
advice.
Yeah, plants seeds of discontent and distrust and then
brings everything from the past right into the future.
Yep, you feel unaccepted. So just
Great point,
take that out of your vocabulary. The other one, there are some other suggestions for rules, but one of them is take turns speaking. So even if you have to do the old elementary school pass the stick thing, sometimes that works for people.
Horrible at that. So bad.
You said like no swearing, but also no lashing out due to frustration. So we're gonna be adults. We're gonna kind of keep our emotions under control. Absolutely okay to get into it, but we're not gonna be screaming. We're not gonna have the cops called on us. We're gonna.
Can I comment on that real fast? One thing that my kids said, this was a couple months ago, they said, you know what? It's fun to hear you guys argue now because it's not screaming and yelling. Right. And 9 times out of 10, it's one of you saying, whatever, and walking away. Right. And so what happens is the whole dynamic of arguing in my household has now came to like a sitcom. Like my kids are like waiting to hear
the popcorn.
Yeah, they're like, this is going to be good. What's mom or dad going to say this time? But there's no dysfunction in it.
Right.
It's just a good old disagreement.
And I think that's a good point for kids too, especially if you have a loved one in recovery, but you've also got other kids in the house. That kind of argument can certainly cause some confusion or fear in children. And so reiterating that to your kids, mommy and daddy might argue or grandma and grandpa might argue. We are never leaving you.
Right.
We're never leaving each other.
Right.
Nothing's ever going to change. We just got to work some stuff, and that will settle your children's heart unbelievably.
Yeah, because you know what, and this isn't on topic, but they go through so much.
Absolutely.
And you don't even, mine were really young when they got taken from Rachel and myself, and it is my duty as a father now to at least honor what was taken from them at such an age of dysfunction, and what mom and dad are really supposed to look at what is a good, healthy relationship supposed to look at. And so my son's 18 now, and he sees me put my wife second. I always tell him she's second, and he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, God's always first. And so they see that now, and they see healthy communication and healthy being honest with one another, and they see that. And I'm sure your kids are the same, and there's nothing better than putting a smile on your kid's face when you're in an argument with your wife.
That's great. The last piece here is there's 2 more. The first one is don't let fear stop you from telling your spouse how you feel.
Absolutely.
You said it perfect. Sometimes as the person not in recovery, you are reluctant to share things because you're afraid it's going to cause them to relapse or cause them to be upset. And that's a codependent way of thinking.
Absolutely.
That's saying I'm going to manage their emotions, so I'm not going to share it. So don't let your fear, just say what needs to be said. How are you feeling about that? What can I do to help you feel better about that? and have a conversation, but
Right.
never let it stop you from sharing
because
what's on your mind.
what happens 9 times out of 10, if that topic comes up, the person that has been in addiction before is, if they're going to relapse, they've been thinking about it for days.
Yeah.
So that kind of
That's
stuff,
not right.
yeah, and you'll see patterns with that.
Yep.
The more that you grow, as your knowledge and grow and you grow together, it doesn't even come up in my household anymore. And if it does, it's okay to share if
Right.
I feel like, hey, like, the whole thing I said, but I will say this, that if it does, we know how to de-escalate it together.
Right.
And that's the key.
Yes.
Is de-escalating it together, not just me going out there and have to find my own solution to help me get through
Right.
it. It's together.
And the more you practice this principle with the little things,
Yes.
it's hot outside, I'd love a beer. Okay,
Yeah.
If a big
Iced
thing,
tea's better.
Right. If
Yeah.
a big one comes along, you guys have practiced. So you're
so it's
you're gonna be
okay.
able to handle it.
And it's
Yeah.
not unhealthy. It's
Absolutely.
better to
Right.
talk about it together than, well, you need to go pray in the corner. Or no, come pray with me in the corner because I need your help on this
Right.
one. So that's
Yep.
good stuff.
And then the other one is practice identifying and sharing your needs. So just like we do an inventory of ourselves for things we might need to make amends for, we should also be doing an inventory of how you're feeling or what you feel like you need. Like, I know for me, a lot of times I'll be agitated and I'll be like, I'm really just feeling lonely, and when I can identify that feeling and then share it out loud, then there's a remedy to that.
Right.
But if I just say like, oh, I just feel weird today, and I don't think about it or I push it out of my head, there's no resolution to that.
Right.
And same thing goes for people in recovery. A lot of times they'll feel agitated or just not sure, and it'll come down to feeling unaccepted. I don't feel accepted. And if they can voice that to their loved one, then we start building some bridges there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Good stuff. The last slide that I have here is just kind of some closing thoughts. The first one is that marriages touched by addiction can thrive when they are infused with our pillars here: commitment, trust, forgiveness, honesty and acceptance, and good communication.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The other thing, and I say this in all of my trainings, and I put an exclamation point and underline it and highlight it and put sparkly stars all around it,
Right.
is absolutely go to counseling. Don't
Absolutely.
feel like there's a stigma attached to it. If there is a cost attached to it that you can't afford, there are programs out there that can help you. Don't let anything become a barrier to you getting some really good clinical counseling, either by yourself or with your spouse. It will make a world of difference. It did
does.
for us.
And you, it's okay to shop around. Find somebody, talk to them before you commit to having a session.
Right.
Because a lot of people just say, we're going to go to this guy, and then they go because that's just who they go to, but nothing's getting done.
Yeah.
So shop around. Find somebody that you're connected, that you can connect with, that you can be
Yep.
honest with.
Yeah, don't be embarrassed to
Yeah.
tell people, I'm looking for a counselor. Do you know anybody? Because a lot of people
Yeah.
are in therapy these days,
Actually,
and it's
yeah.
not. Yeah.
Most pastors, if they're Christian and they want to go that route, they do that, or
Yeah.
they offer that. So a lot of churches or have a lot of resources. So
Absolutely.
reach out.
Yes. The next one is find a support network and be honest about what you're facing. So we
Absolutely.
talked about Celebrate Recovery or AA.
Al-Anon for
Yep,
family. Yeah.
exactly. Find a place, and then when you go, don't be ashamed to share in those
Because most people
settings.
that are there are going to the same thing
Exactly.
you do, so open
Yep.
up.
Yeah.
It's healthy.
Yep. The next one is don't give up. This goes again back to the commitment thing. If we decide that we're going to be in here, we're going to make it work, we're not going to give up. The divorce word is not in our vocabulary. The leave word, give up, is not in our vocabulary. We're just going to do whatever it takes to figure it out because we love each other. End of story.
Amen.
And then the last one is that when your marriage is strong, everyone benefits. Your addicted loved one will experience hope through your united front, and your relationships will grow. There's absolutely hope. Absolutely hope. There's nothing
is.
that can stop you. You can make it through, and it's just really neat to see. I look around our staff, and there are so many other people like us who have been through this journey, and their marriages are strong and happy and
Thriving
healthy.
now.
And so that's really cool.
Yeah, I would say in my last remark, I would say this: to consistently do personal inventory on your part. And I journal all the time. And Fridays I go back and I look at what I journaled, and I'm like, man, I fell short here so many times. So it's okay to do a personal inventory, because if you don't, you're not giving the best. Because if you can't find fault in yourself in different situations, then how do you grow? And so I would say to consistently take personal inventory on your marriage.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
This was fun.
It's awesome.
I hope you guys enjoy it as well.
You better.
And,
or else.
thanks so much.
Toodles.